There is a fact about the moon that most people know and almost never sit with. It only ever shows us one face, the same side, every night, for the entire span of recorded human history. And it wasn't until 1959 that a single photograph of the other side existed anywhere on Earth. The Book of Enoch, written centuries before anyone could confirm that, describes the moon not simply as a light in the sky, but as something governed, something carrying a function, something moving on a fixed law, through gates built specifically for it. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. For 17 centuries, the Church called it forbidden, and tucked into its oldest astronomical chapters is a description of the moon that raises a question almost nobody asks out loud. What, exactly, is it built to do, and why does it only ever let us see half of it doing it? If the kind of question that sits with you long after the video ends is exactly why you keep coming back here, hit subscribe now. Every week we go back into these manuscripts and sit with what doesn't quite resolve. And if you've ever looked up at the moon and felt like it was doing more than just reflecting light, tell me in the comments before we go further. The Astronomical Book, chapters 72 through 82, is the oldest and most technically detailed section of Enoch. Uriel walking Enoch through gates, cycles, and the mechanics of the sky, in language that reads far closer to a field manual than a vision. Inside this section, the moon is described plainly as a vessel that carries light, rather than a source that generates it. Its brightness given to it, passed to it, on a schedule tied to its position relative to the sun. That's not a controversial claim, it's simply what the text says, and it happens to be astronomically accurate in a way a Second Temple writer had no direct way of confirming. But sit with the word choice for a moment. A vessel is a container. A vessel carries something that belongs to someone else. And a text this insistent on precision rarely uses a word like that by accident. Enoch's astronomical book is built around a 364-day solar calendar, divided cleanly into 4 seasons of 91 days each, a system the text treats as the correct, appointed order of things. But the moon's own cycle doesn't fit that number. 12 lunar months run shorter than the solar year by roughly 11 days. A gap the text is aware of and addresses directly, describing the moon's law as distinct from the sun's law, running alongside it rather than in step with it. 2 systems, operating on the same sky, deliberately out of sync with each other. The text doesn't treat this as an error to be corrected. It treats it as designed. 2 separate laws, running in parallel, each one exact on its own terms. Why build 2 governing systems that never fully align, unless the misalignment itself was part of the design? Just as the sun is given 6 eastern and 6 western gates in the astronomical book, the moon is described as having its own gate structure, its own points of entry and exit, distinct from the sun's, timed to its own separate law. The text spends real effort cataloging exactly when the moon rises through which gate, and for how long, month by month, in a level of detail that outpaces almost anything else in the chapter. A structure this elaborate, built around something the text itself frames as secondary to the sun, is a strange amount of architecture to dedicate to something merely decorative. Whoever wrote this treated the moon's schedule as something that needed to be tracked with the same rigor as the sun's, which raises the obvious question of why something merely reflective would need governing this precisely at all. Here's where the ancient text and a modern, uncontested fact sit closer together than most people ever notice. The moon is tidally locked to the earth. The same face has been turned toward us for the entire span of human existence, and the far side was not seen by any human being, in any form, until the Soviet Luna 3 probe returned the first photographs in October of 1959. For every generation before that moment, across every civilization that ever looked up, exactly half of the moon was permanently, structurally unavailable to observation. Not hidden by distance, not hidden by cloud cover. Hidden by the mechanics of the orbit itself, built into the relationship between the 2 bodies from the start. A vessel that reflects light toward us, on a governed schedule, through its own gates, and that, by the plain physics of its orbit, has never once let us see the whole of it. Before we go further, if a detail like that, a genuinely real fact sitting quietly next to a 2,000-year-old description of a governed vessel, is the kind of pattern that makes you want to know more, Subscribe and like this video right now. It's the only way research like this reaches the people who actually want to sit with it. And tell me in the comments, coincidence, or does that timing bother you a little too? This is the detail almost no casual summary of the astronomical book lingers on. The text doesn't simply say the moon moves. It says the moon performs its months according to a law, the same word the text uses elsewhere for something enforced, something with a keeper, not something that simply happens on its own. R. H. Charles's 1906 English translation, still the most widely referenced edition of Enoch, renders much of this section in generalized, almost administrative language: governance, order, appointed time, without dwelling on what governed is doing next to a body the text has already called a vessel. A vessel that is governed is not simply an object obeying gravity. It's something being operated according to a purpose someone else assigned it. The text never tells us who assigned that purpose, or what it's actually for. It just insists, repeatedly, that the moon has one. Return to that mismatched calendar for a moment, because there's a detail worth sitting with longer than most readings give it. The moon's law, running its own 11-day shorter cycle beneath the sun's 364-day year, means that over time the two systems drift apart and then realign, drift apart and realign again. In a slow, repeating rhythm, the text tracks with real precision. A system built to quietly cycle in and out of alignment with the main calendar, on its own separate schedule, isn't the kind of detail you'd expect from a writer who considered the moon a minor, secondary light. It reads more like something designed to move independently, while still remaining accountable to the larger system around it. Present, active, but running its own separate track the entire time. This is the point where the astronomical book, usually so exhaustively specific, goes quiet in a way that stands out. It tells us the moon's gates. It tells us the moon's law, its cycle, its relationship to the sun's light. It does not tell us why any of this matters, what purpose the tracking serves, or what happens once a cycle completes. Other sections of Enoch are explicit about consequence, judgment, sealing, imprisonment, reward. The astronomical book simply catalogs, meticulously, without ever stating what the catalog is for. A record this detailed, kept this carefully, for no stated reason, is either an ancient obsession with pure observation for its own sake, or a record being kept for a purpose the text simply never got around to naming out loud. If the idea of a record being kept without ever being told why is the kind of thing that stays with you after the video ends, hit subscribe and like this video before we finish. There's more of this comparative material still ahead in this series. And tell me in the comments, what do you think a governed vessel like that would actually be recording, if it were recording anything at all? When the Council of Laodicea removed Enoch from Scripture in 364 CE, the objections on record centered on the Watcher's narrative: fallen angels, forbidden teachings, unions with humanity. The astronomical book's calendar dispute and its detailed moon material were never singled out or individually refuted in any surviving conciliar record. They went out under the same broad ban as everything else, unexamined rather than disproven. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed Enoch's cosmological chapters as unworthy of serious study, without addressing their specifics. Augustine, in The City of God, argued that texts making this kind of detailed physical and astronomical claim invited a level of scrutiny the church of his era wasn't equipped to control. Neither man explained why a Second Temple writer would bother describing the moon's law in this much operational detail if the whole passage were simply decorative. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, outside Rome's authority, kept the astronomical book in its canon uninterrupted for over 16 centuries. Calendar disputes and all, never asked to defend a passage no one in power ever directly challenged. None of this is a claim that the moon is a literal machine, built by someone, watching us on purpose the way a camera would. That's not what the text explicitly says, and it's not a claim modern astronomy supports. But it's worth sitting with, carefully, that the plain, uncontested facts still hold exactly as they did when Enoch was written. The moon still only shows us one face. It is still governed by an orbital mechanism that has never once, in the entire span of human civilization prior to 1959, let anyone see the whole of it at once. It still runs on a cycle that drifts in and out of alignment with the solar year, on its own separate schedule, exactly the way the astronomical book describes. Whether any of that amounts to anything more than physics is a question the text never answers, and modern science never asked in these terms to begin with. It just sits there, tonight, exactly the way it always has. One face turned toward us, one face we've never seen. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe a Second Temple writer, working with the only vocabulary available to him, reached for governance and law because that was simply how ancient people described anything precise and repeating, and the resemblance to a hidden, tidally locked far side is pure coincidence. Centuries before anyone could have known to connect the two. Or maybe a text, this insistent on calling the moon a vessel, this precise about its gates, its law, and its quiet drift against the calendar, was pointing at something it never fully explained. And maybe the reason no council ever bothered refuting this particular passage is that no one in power ever thought anyone would look at it this closely, this long after it was written. So I'll leave you with the question the text itself never answers, and modern astronomy has simply never had a reason to ask. If that vessel really has been governed on a fixed law this entire time, carrying a light that was never its own, what do you think it's actually been keeping track of, on the side we've never seen? Tell me what you believe in the comments. I read every one.